But my beats, they are hard.
Welcome back to the BCSN SportsWrap. Bryan and AD here. Brian Fulford, AD Drew here. And going back through our end of the season, our end of the year review in Black college football, of all the things that we've done. I'm definitely proud of the work that we've been putting in. So we hope that you are enjoying this sort of look back in the season. Now, this will be fun because I think right now we're going to get into talking about some of the games of the year. Now, there are so many games, we didn't have enough time to rank games of the year. I'm not even going to lie. I thought about it, but it's too much right now. But so we just sort of did a listing of just some of the games that were significant. And I think what I'd like to, when it's all said and done, what I'd like for you guys to do, if you're listening, let us know which week was the most impressive week. I think as we go through this, we tried to do them by week so you could get a perspective. But we want to hear what you guys thought maybe were the best weeks of the year. We definitely have a couple of nominees when we were going back and talking about it that we really thought, oh, man, that is a great week. How did we forget about that? But let's start, AD. I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's start with the HBCU versus PWIs. A lot of times, whether it be on the D2 level or on the FCS level, we're playing outside of the HBCU market against other FCS and Division II teams, and sometimes those turn into some pretty good contests. There hasn't been a great history of HBCUs winning those games, unfortunately. That's a sad thing and another conversation for another day. But I think we got a few games that we can kind of stick our chest outs about this year, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Let's start off with week one, A&T over Elon. And that was one with a last-second kick by Noel Ruiz after he had missed 2 field goals earlier in the game. Now, Noel Ruiz only missed 4 field goals the entire season, Brian. 2 of them came in this particular game. But he did hit the game-winning 52-yard field goal as time expired. So is that a walk-off kick? How do we describe that? I guess that's what you call it, a walk-off kick. And both of these teams came into this game nationally ranked. So That was the significance of this particular game, Brian.
Yeah, another great opening season win. And we talk about the things that separate A&T from everyone else. It's these type of games. And for now the 3rd straight year, they've opened their season with a big win against a PWI, and that's why A&T is, highly regarded, especially over the last couple of years, as one of the top programs in Black college football.
Yes. Moving on down the line, same week, South Carolina State defeated Wofford in a stunner as quarterback Tyreek Nick ran for 1 and scored and passed for 1. And here's the thing. South Carolina State defense picked off 4 Wofford passes. and did not give up a touchdown until late in the game, defeating Wofford 28-13. Wofford was number 8 coming into that game.
Yeah, that to me, AD, that was the game, combined with the fact that South Carolina State did go on to be recognized as the conference co-champs. That should have got them into the playoffs as an at-large. There were some teams that went into the FCS playoffs as a wild card that they had a better record than and probably were better than. But for whatever reason, maybe because there's some bias against the MEAC or they just weren't – South Carolina State wasn't really ranked in the top 25 at all this year, largely ignored. And that's to be and the thing against them, they didn't beat A&T, they didn't beat FAMU. So they didn't beat the 2 best teams. So, granted, they were the 3rd best team in the MEAC. Maybe that had something to do with it. But anyway, the Wofford win should have got them some extra props. Wofford was never the same after that. I think they finished like 6-5 or 6-6, needless to say. But that preseason ranking was the highest Wofford was all year. Still a good win, though. Great win.
Yes. Next one. A&T, 2 weeks later, after the week 1, had a comeback victory over Charleston Southern. The significance of this game, that was the 299 game for Jermaine Martin.
Yeah,
and of course, Ruel kicked a couple field goals in the 27-21 victory over Charleston Southern.
Yeah, don't bury the lead. The lead on that definitely was the 299, but the A&T, to be able to score 21 fourth-quarter points, Martin had a 84-yard touchdown run, then a 76-yard touchdown run. It was like, wow. I think that caught Charleston Southern off guard. They were controlling that game for the first 3 quarters, and then all of a sudden, A&T's running game just broke out. I should say Jermaine Martin broke out and he just finished 1 yard short of 300 on 21 carries. It's pretty awesome. So that was, and that came on the heels of A&T losing to Duke. A game in which I thought they would be more competitive against Duke than they were. But it was still a good win for North Carolina A&T that point in the year. Moving forward, what do you got?
All right, next one is
same week. It looks like
same week. Kentucky State, Robert Morris. Kentucky State defeated Robert Morris. Yeah, 13-7. That it was the same one, but it was Kentucky State's first game of the season because they started their season late, and that was their first win since 2017.
Right. Yeah,
and
it was
the first time they had beat a Division I opponent since 2002.
Yeah.
Brett Sylvie had carried the ball 20 times for 87 yards and a touchdown in that particular game, along with Myers 65 yards on 13 attempts, and that's when we realized how deep this running game was going to be for them.
Yeah, statistically was not a great game, but defensively, Kentucky State did a great job against Robert Morris in that game. And just to be able to start your season like that after what 2016 was like for so many of those guys who were on that roster, man, what a great feeling to start the year with. And we got one more game from week 3 that was pretty outstanding too.
Moving on, Alabama A&M over North Alabama, game that's right down the road from them, about an hour away. But A&M trailed 18-0 at the half before coming back and winning the game 28-21, Brian. Bentley ran 26 times for 124 yards. glass with the game-winning touchdown in this particular game.
Yeah, I remember watching that game and I started watching it in the second half because I just saw the score 18-0, and I was like, oh, man, Alabama A&M, just on the heels of, just play, they had the comeback win in the Black College the Black College Hall of Fame Classic against Morehouse, and then I forgot who they played in week 2. But this, I was like, was really rooting for Alabama A&M to have a good game. And that second half, man, Jordan Bentley was just insane in that second half, and they just dominated that game, winning 31-24. So it basically outscored them 31-6 in the second half. Alabama A&M, great win.
All right, now moving on to the last game that we have, Albany State over West Georgia in Week 4, and Albany State was another run-heavy team, having run for 253 yards in this particular game, and they outgained West Georgia only by 2 yards in that particular game.
Yeah, 358 to 356. Yeah, the Rams rushed for 253 yards on 49 carries.
Yeah, and that was Albany State's first victory of the year in that particular game, also, Bryan.
Yeah, I think that was coming up. That was a game that they talk about a team that needed a win. I mean, they had been sort of. I and probably a lot of people had high expectations for them against Valdosta State, and they just got stomped at home. I mean, they were hosting that game against Valdosta State. They got stomped, and then they lost the next week. I believe they lost the next week to Fort Valley State, if I'm not mistaken. So that was a bit of a shocker. And so now then you looked up and you're like, wow, okay, wait a minute. Albany State, we're 0-2 going into this game against West Georgia. So that's why that was a big win for them. So, yeah, those were, let's see. So that's 5 games. That's a big 5
six
there.
Games, actually.
Oh, who's the 6th?
Did I count 6 or did I count 5? Yeah, you're right. 5 games.
5.
I can't count. That's
count,
right. Bryan.
That's all right. That's why I'm here.
That's why you're the lead over the show, and I'm the secondary.
Nah. It's all good. It's all good. All right. So that was our PWIs, and I didn't do last year. I did a look back on the total wins, and it wasn't pretty. I told myself I'm not going to do that this year. It's too depressing, but we need more wins. We need our HBCUs to get more wins when they play the PWIs. I think some of the more disappointing wins that I recall just from off the top of my head was Virginia Union losing to Lenoir-Rhyne. And this was coming off the heels of Virginia Union beating Hampton. So, I mean, there's a D2 beating D1. They beat them 36-19 at Hampton. And so then they turned around and came back home and lost a tough game. I mean, they just got beaten by Lenoir-Rhyne in every possible way. That was probably the more memorable loss that I recall. And then, of course, in the SWAC, there was a pair of games where McNeese State kept their streak alive against the SWAC. Not only did they beat McNeese State, not only did they beat Southern to start the season, but then 2 weeks later they beat Alcorn State. And I think the Southern game was a touchdown. I think the final score was by a touchdown. And it was a 3-point game against Alcorn State. So I think the Alcorn State game was much closer. But in both cases, McNeese State had a lead. And then Southern and Alcorn State kind of got a couple of scores and made it close in the end. But again, I think McNeese State has some kind of streak. I think it's almost like double-digit wins in a row against SWAC opponents. So, good luck to you SWAC teams that are out there scheduling McNeese State. Eventually somebody's going to beat them, right? You got to hold out hope. All right, AD, so let's do this now. Let's sort of do the rundown and we'll try to be as quick as possible because, we're getting deep into the show, coming up towards the end, and we'll just go through the list. And then you guys tell us which week did you think was the best week of the year? How about that? And AD, as we're going through, I'll just jump in wherever. I'll kind of come to you after each week, and you kind of tell me your thought as you think back. And again, this is just us recollecting our thoughts through the week, and give props to Chris Ferguson and Mo Carter, both for helping us out in sort of the recollection and thoughts of some of the games through the course that we just went back and looked at from 2019. All right, let's get started here. Starting in week number 1, the week 1 on the calendar, no HBCUs played in week 0. The traditional week 0, no HBCUs played. Actually, Virginia Union Lynchburg actually played that week, and they won. That might have been their only win of the season, that game. But other than that, no one else played in week 0. So week 1, we had the Black College Hall of Fame Classic, which turned into a pretty classic ball game. Alabama A&M against Morehouse. Morehouse did a quarterback change in the second half, going away from Daniel Sims, I believe. Sims is the last name. Michael Sims, thank you. I get Daniel Smith and Michael Sims. That's what I want to call him. But it was Michael Sims. I get those two guys mixed up every now and then.
His mama named him Michael. I'm going to call him Michael.
There you go. Thank you. They switched from him, went to the backup quarterback, and they went on a little rally. Morehouse, a nice little second-half rally to actually take a lead at one point where they took a 30-28 lead with about a minute or so to go. But Akil Glass did what he would end up doing all year, was just engineer a great comeback as he hit Brian Jenkins a couple of times. Alabama A&M drove the ball all the way down to, I believe, about the 18-yard line. They were within field goal range that kicking a field goal would have produced a 1-point win. Instead, Akil Glass goes to the end zone to Brian Jenkins with about maybe 3 or 4 seconds left on the clock, and an outstanding win for A&M over Morehouse. And, so that Alabama A&M avoided the upset. And Morehouse almost had its second consecutive season-opening win over a SWAC team. I mean, remember, last year they started the year with, the win over UAPB. Yeah.
Correct.
So, all right, let's move over to week number 2. Top games include Virginia Union on the road at Hampton, beating them 38-17. Union was a 7.5-point underdog. You also had, and I think this was why we talked about how big Alabama A&M's week 3 was. UAPB put up 52 points on Alabama A&M, beat them as a 14.5-point underdog. Totally unexpected. I mean, I don't think we expected that kind of offensive production from UAPB, but they had a great game, and they beat A&M on the road. So that was a bit of a shocker, no doubt. Also, how about the annual Alabama State-Tuskegee matchup? This one, again, went down to a 38-31 win for Alabama State. This is 2 years in a row now, right, Drew?
Don't remind me.
Yeah, sorry.
And
it wasn't
with a late comeback.
Well, yeah, but this one was, Alabama State scored the go-ahead touchdown early in the fourth quarter, and Tuskegee, was unable to tie it up. But it wasn't like last year where it went down to, an overtime thriller. This one just was a point shootout. Both teams trading back and forth, and it just came out. Alabama State got a late score in the fourth quarter, and then held on, played great defense throughout. And they ended up winning 2 years in a row against Tuskegee. Kentucky State, of course, AD just mentioned the 13-7 win over Robert Morris. So that was week number 2. Moving forward, week number 3, AD. How about starting off with Chowan putting 70 points on Alderson Broaddus? And they did it behind 7 touchdown passes by Bryce Witt. 5 of them were caught by Amik Watkins. So Bryce Witt, we just saw a quarterback in the College Bowl season throw 7 touchdown passes and a half. But Bryce Witt started it early when he threw 7 against Alderson Broaddus. And
Bryan, I need to put this in perspective. How many touchdown passes did Kentucky State throw in the year again?
9.
Was it
9 total. 9 total.
And Bryce Witt almost tied their season total in one game.
Yeah, definitely. Also from week 3, you had what was probably maybe you talked about the comebacks. You talked about A&T's comeback over Charleston Southern. You already talked about Alabama A&M's comeback over North Alabama. But this was a comeback between Bowie State and Shaw that you probably had to see it or be there to believe it. Shaw was up by 2 touchdowns. Let's see. They would have been up 21-12, I believe. 21-12 on Bowie State with about 5 minutes to play. Shaw is punting. They get their punt blocked. The ball is recovered in the end zone by Bowie State. Now you have a 21-19 game. On the next possession, Shaw goes like 3 and out, punch the ball again. That one gets blocked by the same young man. And if I can quickly find my notes, I can give him a shout out here because he was our defensive player of the week that week. I want to find his name here. Blake Dove, sophomore running back who's on special teams. He blocked both punts. He didn't recover both of them, but he blocked them both. And the second one was recovered in the red zone, like inside the 10-yard line, and Bowie State would go on and score a quick touchdown, and they would defeat Shaw 26-21. So you kind of think back and say, it takes sometimes luck and a little bit of magic to have an unbeaten season. That game right there is one of the games you can count on and look back on Bowie State's season and say, wow, what an unbelievable finish to that game. Also, Allen University got a 16-10 win over Clark Atlanta. Clark had a pretty bad season this past year, going winless 0-10, and Allen University had
a horrible season.
Well, come on, you have to say all that. But anyway, Allen, how about getting a win to start the season? NAIA Allen with that win over Clark. And then the last game was the Southern Heritage Classic, Jackson State versus Tennessee State. How about this to open a game? When's the last time you saw both teams start the season or start the game with kickoff return touchdowns? First, it was Jackson State opening the game with a kickoff return on the opening kick. And then right back on the next kick, Tennessee State, Chris Rowland, he ends up getting a kick return, goes 96 yards. So one answer to another. There were almost 100 points scored. Jackson State won that ball game 49-44. So lots of scoring, lots of points in that ball game. And Jackson State, this is coming off of 2 weeks earlier in the MEAC SWAC Challenge, but didn't look great offensively. So that was a big game. So keep that one in mind, folks. Week number 3. That was a pretty impressive week right there. But it gets better. Any quick comments there on week 3, AD, before I jump to week 4?
One of our candidates for Week of the Year.
All right, one of our candidates, exactly. Here's another, and I'm telling you now, this is another game or another week that you have to kind of put down as a week of the year candidate. And let's start with Winston-Salem State traveling to Tuskegee. This is a CIAA versus SIAC matchup. It's also the matchup between the two winningest programs over the course of the decade in Division II black college football. Winston-Salem State was number 1. Tuskegee was number 2. And it would be the Rams, Winston-Salem, going on the road, getting a 23-20 victory over Tuskegee. I think the score was a little closer in the game. I think Tuskegee got a late score to cut the deficit to 3. But Winston-Salem pretty much had the lead early, and I don't think they surrendered it. So, just one of those games, another bad loss. At that point, I think Tuskegee is 0-2, if I'm not mistaken, at that point in the year, AD, or at least 1-2 at that point. All right, now the next 4 games all went down to the wire, all went down to the last play to be decided. And we'll start at Tennessee State. UAPB at Tennessee State. This one would come down to the very last play of regulation. UAPB, the score is tied up at 31. Right after Tennessee State had just tied the game up at 31, I think there couldn't have been more than 50-something seconds left on the clock. UAPB drove all the way down, and then on the last play of the ball game, Shannon Patrick completes a touchdown, and UAPB wins the game with no time on the clock. 37-31 is the final score. And at that point in the season, UAPB had already knocked off Alabama A&M. They went and beat Tennessee State, and I think they were 3-1 at that point, and eyes were open to, wow, what type of team is UAPB? And so a lot of eyes were open.
And they wound up being ranked in our initial poll because of those early season victories, and deservedly so.
Great point, yeah. Now, the next 3 games all took place on night, and they were all on television or streamed online. So that was another big thing about Week 4. You had Alcorn State. Let me go in order here. I'll go in orders. First, you had the game in Tallahassee, Florida A&M against Southern. That was streamed on ESPN. 27,000-plus people at Bragg Stadium in Tallahassee. I think it was the first time.
27,000 people in a 26,000-seat stadium.
It's one of the first times Southern had not been to Tallahassee in at least a decade or so. So that was pretty cool to see, and they brought the jukebox. So I mean, they brought their band, they brought the Southern Dolls. I mean, it was an outstanding atmosphere. FAMU grabbed the first half lead, first quarter lead, halftime. Southern did come back though in the second half, and even at one point had taken a lead following a Ryan Stanley interception. Southern grabbed, I think, like a 21-20 lead, or 21-19 lead, something like that. And so FAMU started the fourth quarter drive inside of their own 5-yard line, and Ryan Stanley connected with Xavier Smith on a big play about 40-something yards. And a few plays later, he connected with Smith again on a nice route. I mean, it's one of those routes that it just sticks in my head. It was a corner post route. I just remember Coach Simmons telling me that, corner post. If you see it on the video, it was a nice move. Xavier Smith catches the touchdown. FAMU won 27-21. And at that point, I think people are eyes are opening. People are like, whoa, FAMU might just be that kind of team this year. Moving on to the next game that was online, and this one was being streamed on Facebook Live, and it was between Shaw and Shawan. Now, we already told you what happened to Shaw just a couple of weeks ago, giving up 2 block punts in under 5. And we just told you last week, Shawan put up 70 in week 3. So you've got Shaw versus Shawan, and somehow, some way, Shaw opened up with a huge first half lead. I think they were up maybe 21-0 at halftime. Shame on me for not going up and look this up. But I just remember them I knew Shawan had 0. So Shaw had like maybe 28 or 31 points, something like that. It ended up going to overtime as Shawan would battle back tied the game up in the 40s. I think it was maybe 41-41 at the end of regulation. First overtime, neither team was able to convert a field goal or score any points, so it goes into double overtime. Shaw scores first, converts the PAT. Shawan, on their first possession of second overtime, they score, but then they decide to go for two. This game is being played at Shawan, so they're home. Coach is like, the new rules in the NCAA say after second overtime, you got to go for two anyway, right? So Shawan says, we're going for two. And they go for two, and Bryce Witt throws a ball to the back corner of the end zone. His receiver, a tight end, was maybe a half an inch away from catching that ball. It touched his fingers. That's all I remember watching. But anyway, incomplete pass. Shaw wins 48-47. And then I've got one more, AD. I'm not done. Alcorn State playing Prairie View A&M, a cross-division matchup in the SWAC. It also was the first game for Felix Harper starting. Noah Johnson, the 2018 Offensive Player of the Year, got hurt the week before. And so Felix Harper, the junior backup quarterback, was starting the game, and all he does is go out and engineer some great plays, great drives, but it was Alcorn State put up 40-plus points, actually would win this game 45-41, largely in part to Felix Harper leading a late drive in the fourth quarter, a game-winning touchdown pass with 40 seconds left to win the ball game over Prairie View A&M. They're a great, talented offensive group. DeWanya Tucker, the running back, Jalen Morton, the quarterback. Jalen Morton, I think, threw 4 touchdown passes, had 2 interceptions in the ball game. And DeWanya Tucker also had a pretty big ball game as well in that game. He ran 22 times, 128 net yards, 2 touchdowns. So the offense for Prairie View did their thing, but Solomon Muhammad, the linebacker from Alcorn State, recorded 18 tackles. 15 of them were solo. He had 2.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack. I believe, AD, that 18 tackles stood as the season high for the year. Your thoughts on week 4?
I think that is correct. I don't recall seeing anybody with over 18 tackles. When I was going back through the stats, there were I think there was one 17 tackle game, a couple of 16 tackle games, and then a few more 15. But that 18 was the high for the year, and I believe 10 of those 18 were solos, if I recall the stats correct, Bryan.
Yeah.
And I think there was one other game that was not on the list from that particular week.
Really?
Savannah State against Charleston Southern. I believe that was the same week, whereas Savannah State had the ball with an opportunity to win the game, but came up just a little bit short for their second loss of the season. And when you couple that with back in week 1, when they went for 2 on the victory and did not get it, we could be looking at a 9-1 Savannah State team, Bryan. And what would the debate be then if Savannah State would have went 9-1 without the ability to play in the playoffs?
Right, and having beaten an FCS team had they beaten Charleston Southern, right?
Right. Who would you have voted number 2, Miles or Savannah State?
Ooh, are you going to really put me on the spot right now for that? Wow, that's tough. I might have voted Savannah State because it's not like Savannah State was being penalized for any type of NCAA sanction or that's tough. I probably, I might have voted Savannah State too.
Yeah,
I might have done that.
Right. Would you have considered them number 1?
No.
Consider they would have had a victory over a power Division II team in Florida Tech, and then a FCS team in Charleston Southern versus a 11-0 Bowie team or 11-1 Bowie team who played no FCS teams. Would have been an interesting debate.
Yeah, it would have been. I mean, their one loss was to Alcorn State in your scenario, because that is who they lost to during the course of the year. So, yeah, that's an interesting.
You make the same argument that you would make for FAMU. You have to throw that game out the window.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Man, crazy. All right, so that was week 4. Keep that one in mind, kids. That week 4. So we've already given you week 3 and week 4, already 2 outstanding weeks. It gets a little thinner after that. Week number 5, the biggest game, I thought, AD mentioned it, the Kentucky State win over Jackson State happened in week number 5. But you also had Savannah State traveling on the road and beating Morehouse in their first SIAC game since 1998. That's what Savannah State, and they won that game 17-10. You also had Prairie View beating Grambling State in the State Fair Classic behind a record-setting performance by DeWanya Tucker. 26 carries, 263 net yards, and 2 touchdowns. So that was a pretty impressive day on that day for DeWanya Tucker. But if I would say probably the game of that week probably had to be Kentucky State beating Jackson State. Can I move on to week 6?
Let's move.
All right, week 6 is a little thinner. The only real game that of note in week 6, I thought, or that we pointed out, was Miles with a 31-27 win over Clark. Now, on the surface, you would say, why is that game, a game of the week? Well, the conditions of that game.
That was the game that started yesterday but finished today.
Exactly. A game that started on a Saturday afternoon. It was Miles' homecoming, so that game was supposed to start Saturday afternoon.
I believe
unfortunately,
that was a 4:00 kick on that particular day.
Right. It didn't actually kick until that evening. There was some ridiculous weather pattern rolling through Alabama that had all kinds of games delayed. But that game didn't actually kick off until later that evening. And then there was another delay in the third quarter
for Lightning.
For Lightning, in which Clark Atlanta had a lead, had almost a 2-touchdown lead, 27 to, I think it was like 17, a 27-17 lead over Miles at that point in the ball game. And because that game is a conference game, they had to play that game. So by the time the weather system cleared out, we were into Sunday. I mean, you're talking homecoming. So, I mean, whatever party plans guys had, they were canceled. They were gone. I mean, you're just.
That means you missed the step show. I'm pretty sure they did not do the 5th quarter.
Well, the only people from what I was told, the only people who were in that game were probably maybe family and those media people who were covering the game. Anyone else, they left. By the time they came back out, it was, I think, 12:30 a.m. the next day, and the game finished sometime a little bit before 2 a.m., and it was really funny seeing the first text or first tweet about the game. For some reason, I was still up at 1:30 in the morning, or maybe I just woke up off the couch. One of the two happened. And I saw that, Miles had won 31-27, came from behind to beat Clark in a weather delay game. And that was kind of like, wow, talk about the longest day, the longest football game probably in Miles college football history, I would guess. Who knows? But that was the only game from week 6 that sort of stood out. Moving over to week number 7. This was the week Florida A&M traveled to South Carolina State. And the South Carolina State had been a house of horrors over the last decade, probably over the last, let's just say during the Buddy Pugh era. FAMU had very little to no success beating his teams at South Carolina State. Add that to the equation that South Carolina State came to Tallahassee last year and just walloped FAMU. I think it was 44-21. South Carolina State, that was part of that 3-game losing streak at the end of the year for FAMU.
I believe that was the start of the 3-game losing streak.
Well, it was in the middle of it because the start of it was losing to Howard.
Right,
yeah, the start of it was losing to Howard.
The State game did not count.
It didn't count on It didn't count on the conference. So, it was just it just sucked to lose that game the way you did. It didn't help you because the next week you had to go play in the Florida Classic. But anyway, FAMU came into that game and then combined the fact that Buddy Pugh, with a win against FAMU, would become the winningest coach in South Carolina State football history with a win. So all that combined going into this ball game, but FAMU would actually get up early and get up to almost a 15-point lead and looked like they were about to take it to 3 touchdowns when interception was thrown in the end zone by quarterback Ryan Stanley. So FAMU's defense had played a very good ball game to the point where they, I recall them neutralizing Tyrese Nick pretty much, and South Carolina State went to the backup. They went to the backup quarterback, and young Mr. Fields, first name is escaping me right now. I know you've got it on one of your sheets there, AD, so feel free to jump in. But the backup quarterback came in, down 15 points, engineered 2 quick touchdown drives. FAMU did throw in a touchdown in there. So anyway, a 2-touchdown game turned into a ball game late in the fourth quarter. And then the unthinkable happened. A blocked punt was recovered in the end zone late in the fourth quarter. And all of a sudden, South Carolina State had a lead. Unfortunately for South Carolina State, there was so much excitement, guys running onto the field celebrating, that it resulted in an unsportsmanlike penalty for 15 yards. Then on the kickoff, the kicker kicked the ball out of bounds. So now you put FAMU back at the 50-yard line
with another 5-yard penalty.
Right, and so now FAMU starting at midfield, down by 3 points, and it didn't take long for FAMU to get into the end zone as Ryan Stanley would connect with young man name escapes me right now, but anyway, Stanley connects in a touchdown. FAMU ends up winning that ball game. David Manigo. Nope, it wasn't David Manigo. Anyway, FAMU connected with the touchdown to win 42.
Marcus Williams? Was it Marcus
I don't
Williams?
think so. No, I don't.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we'll go with that.
We have Marcus Williams from 22 yards out.
There we go. 2. That would be the first of 2. Just a little spoiler alert there.
I'm sorry. Wrong.
I told you it wasn't him. See, you should have just let it go like I did. Let it go.
Marcus Williams was the next week.
Exactly. See, let it go. Anyway, that turned out to be a significant win for FAMU. As we all knew, at that point in the year, the 3 or 4 best teams in the MEAC were FAMU, A&T, South Carolina State, and Bethune. And whoever came out of that group of 3 games with the best record would probably win and be the MEAC champs. What do you know? FAMU came out of that 2-1, I think. Yeah, FAMU came out of that 2-1. Anyway, that was a big game, big win for FAMU because the next week was week number 8, and FAMU had North Carolina A&T coming. So can I skip forward? Can I move forward to week number 8?
Yes, sir.
We had 2 big things going on in week number 8. We had a big showdown in Division II between Bowie State and Virginia State. That was a Northern Division CIAA matchup. And at the time, we kind of felt that there was, really a 3-team race between Bowie, Virginia State, Virginia Union. How those teams did against each other would sort of shape how the North would be won. Well, Bowie State fired the first shot, getting a 24-14 win over Virginia State. That was pretty significant. Also on Saturday, you had Langston traveling to Ottawa, Arizona. Ottawa University of not Ottawa University of Arizona, but Ottawa in Arizona, I think is what their name is, something like that. Ottawa University of Arizona.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The significance of this game, Langston had not lost a conference game since 2016. And this was a matchup between two top 20 ranked teams in NAIA. Ottawa would get a big win, 27-7 over Langston. It turned out to be their first loss. And pretty much we thought that Langston, it might kind of end their run of conference championships, did we not?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did, because Ottawa was in control of the Sooner Athletic Conference at that point in time.
Yeah, they definitely were. Good. Fortunately for Langston, later on, Ottawa would lose a game and open the door, lose a conference game and open the door for Langston to split the title. Unfortunately, Langston never got back high enough in the rankings to qualify for the playoffs. Another big game, a comeback game between Fayetteville State and Johnson C. Smith, and we mention this because Fayetteville State has sort of run the CIAA South, and, if they were to lose to Johnson C. Smith, it would have opened the door for some other teams to have a shot. And so Johnson C. Smith had an 11-point lead in the fourth quarter. Fayetteville State would need a couple of touchdown scores in the final 6 minutes and 6 seconds to win, including a game-winning touchdown with 2:02 to play. So Fayetteville State ends up with a 35-34 win over Johnson C. Smith. Now, the reason I didn't mention FAMU versus North Carolina A&T is because the game actually was moved from Saturday to Sunday.
Because of a weather system. I believe there was a tropical storm, or I don't think it was a hurricane. It was a tropical storm that came through the southeastern portion of the United States, which caused a lot of games to be moved. A couple games were moved up in time. Most games will wind up moving back in time. And I even think there may have been a game that was canceled due to that potential weather threat.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was definitely one of those situations where it was announced, I believe, on Thursday. On Thursday, before A&T got on the road or made their plans, it was announced that the game was going to be moved. And there was even a little bit of chatter or some conversation that it possibly could get. They weren't going to cancel that game because that game was supposed to be a conference game, but maybe that they would possibly maybe reschedule it later in the year. But it was determined that they could play that game Sunday, and so they chose to play that game Sunday afternoon. And so I think that affected you didn't have quite the crowd that I think you almost would have had. I mean, you would have had at the 27,000 that were there for Southern FAMU, this game would have rivaled it because at this point in the season, you've got number one North Carolina A&T in many polls, including ours. FAMU was sitting at number 2, maybe number 3 after beating South Carolina State. And so this was going to be a game, obviously last year FAMU had beat A&T. And so, I mean, this was a game circled in everybody's calendar. I mean, this was a huge game. And so it lived up to the hype. FAMU, of course, ended up winning in overtime, 34-31. We had all kinds of stuff that happened in this game. You had a melee at halftime. You had a couple of guys, including a couple of key players for North Carolina A&T who got ejected or were suspended in the second half of that game. For the little ruckus at halftime. You had a FAMU coach that got suspended for the second half.
Two things that stick out to me about this game, Brian. Number one, it's hard for an incident to delay the band coming onto the field be that the 100 or be that any band of a HBCU. But the halftime melee did delay for 3 minutes the bands actually started their performances. I guess it was kind of good that A&T did not bring their band because of the schedule change, because there would have been no way that both bands would have been able to perform their halftime performances with everything else, the extracurriculars that went on during halftime. That's number one. And the number two thing that stuck out with me in this particular game was the backup quarterback finished the game for both teams, as both quarterbacks were hurt in the fourth quarter of that particular game, Bryan.
Yeah, hey, that's a good point. Good point. You did get to see possibly the future of this rivalry, and it did come down to A&T kicking a field goal in the beginning of overtime, and then FAMU scoring on a Rashawn McKay to Marcus Williams. There's your Marcus Williams reference. And that's how that game was won. You were at that game too. You got some good footage of that game when it happened.
Including the tweet of the game-winning touchdown that had over 20,000 views.
Yeah, I was going to say, is your Twitter feed still buzzing after that game? You know,
it buzzed for about 3 weeks after that particular game, Bryan.
Very cool moment.
And I am so glad that that winning touchdown wound up getting about 10 times more views than the melee tweet that I posted about an hour beforehand.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's good. Good to hear. All right, so yeah, that was week number 8. So overall, just a couple of big games there. Nothing too much to fuss about. Moving on, we're getting the second half of the season now. It's getting crunch time for a lot of teams. We move to week number 9, and the big games for week number 9 actually started on a Thursday night, as Jackson State would defeat Prairie View A&M in double overtime, and the field goal, just one team making field goals, the other team blocking field goals. And that's all I remember about that Thursday night game. I don't know if you had any other recollections of that, but it was a good win by Jackson State all the while.
I don't recall anything significant in that game, Bryan. I got so many games in my head right now. It's kind of tough to remember what I saw when, especially when I went at the game live.
All right. Well, it was an ESPN Thursday night game. I just, I remember it did come down to kick field goals, one team making them, the other team missing them, or them being blocked rather. So, that was a good win for Jackson State all the same. Also in week number 9, you had Grambling on the road at UAPB. And, if UAPB was going to be taken seriously as a contender in the SWAC West, they needed to beat Grambling. And they did end up doing that. They did end up being UAPB 39-33 in that ball game. Obviously, one of the feature games of that week was a top 25. It was the only top 25 matchup in Division II between Bowie State, who was at the time ranked number 1 in our poll, going up against Virginia Union, ranked number 2 in our poll. And, of course, this is 1 week after Bowie played Virginia State. And pretty much, if Bowie won this, we kind of felt like Bowie would win the North and they'd be in control of their destiny. If Virginia Union won, it would set up a big matchup later in the year against Virginia State. The results did not by any means match the expectation that we had for this game, as Bowie State ran Virginia Union out of the gym, 52-17. Jerome Johnson had a big day, in my opinion. He was 23 of 29, 395 yards, threw 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. Just an outstanding day. Probably, in my opinion, one of his best days of the season. But that was a big win for Bowie State. Also in Division II, we had another big upset involving one of our top teams, and that was Miles. As Miles traveled up to Central State, it was wet, cold, rainy conditions, sloppy field, and Central State with a late field goal in the final closing seconds of the ball game to defeat Miles 15-13. I believe it was about a 40-something yard field goal that barely made it across the crossbar. Central State won that game 15-13. Also in the SIAC, Savannah State would get a 35-19 win over Albany State. Now, this was a big-time SIAC East matchup. Albany State had been the kings of the East up to this point, and Savannah State just stole their soul at home, 35-19. That was a big win for Savannah State. Moving over to the MEAC. I should have gone to the MEAC afterwards, but we had North Carolina Central beating Delaware State, and that one ended on a kickoff return touchdown for the win. North Carolina Central, with a big win, 30-23 on the pretty much almost a final kick return after Delaware State had tied the ball game up at 23. That was a big win for Central. South Carolina State versus Bethune. This was the week before we had a MEAC showdown between FAMU and A&T. Well, then you had South Carolina State versus Bethune, and this week it was Bethune's homecoming. South Carolina State goes on the road, knocks off Bethune 27-21. It would actually turn out to be the kind of game that really would set Savannah State up to have a chance at winning. South Carolina State had already lost to FAMU, and so now beating Bethune. At this point, all they really needed to do was win one more week against A&T down the road. And then the last game would turn out to be a triple overtime Magic City Classic between Alabama A&M and Alabama State that went down 43-41. It was a great game, a game you had to see. You had to be there to see it. It was obviously weather was bad, so watch it on TV when I say see it. That was a great game. So week number 9, that right there, that was a mouthful right there, AD. That was a heavy week and definitely is in contention for week of the year. Wouldn't you say?
I definitely would say.
All right, that would definitely be right there in the mix. All right, I want to do this. I want to take a quick break and come back with the last couple of weeks of the season. And again, so far we're candidates week 3, week 4, week 9. But hey, guess what? We got one more week upcoming that you need to consider for your week of the season. And we'll tell you what that is when we come back right after the break. You are listening to the BCSN Sports Wrap with AD and Drew. Or actually, no. I'm Bryan. That's AD. You caught that, right? Yeah, stop laughing. All right, we'll be back right after.
It didn't. What happened was a gentleman wanted to do the Black College Sports Network in partnership with the HBCU for these black colleges.
Absolutely.
And it would have educated the Black College Sports Network. This is what he wanted to do. That would have educated a lot of black kids. Okay. That was the real reason why I got into it, was when I saw what happened with the Black College Sports Network,
The Black College Sports Network is proud to partner with ComputerRatings.com. That's COMPUGHTER ratings.com for the upcoming college football season. ComputerRatings.com delivers rankings, game predictions, and statistics for hundreds of professional and collegiate teams. The key feature of ComputerRatings.com is the Versus Sports Simulator, which allows users to simulate any possible matchup and view the predicted scores along with a side-by-side stats analysis. Improve your odds by signing up for a subscription. Monthly, semi-yearly, and yearly subscriptions are available. For our listeners and viewers, use the promo code BCSN19 and get 15% off of your subscription at checkout. Visit www.computerratings.com. That's COMPUGHTER ratings.com.
It's like a loot machine. All around town, people trying to get down. It's like a loot machine.
Let's face it, shopping for insurance can be time-consuming. That's why when it comes to your auto, home, and life insurance needs, make things simple and trust the experts at Allstate. They will help you get the coverage that fits your needs while helping you bundle your life, home, and auto policies. Bundling saves you money, sure, but it also saves you time, so you can enjoy the things that matter most even more. Contact me, Tammy Haynes, your local agent, for a free personalized insurance quote. Allstate, are you in good hands?
Majesty is a premium health and wellness tea line focused on bringing delicious yet healthy tea blends to the community. Filled with an abundance of vitamins and antioxidants, we work to blend teas with exotic spices and fruits to produce scrumptious and wholesome beverages. So check us out at mymajesties.com. That's MyMajesties.com. My Majesties, an Urban Passport member.
All right, welcome back to the BCSN Sports Wrap. I guaranteed I'm Brian Fulford, and that's AD Drew. Trying to be somebody else. Not going to work on this podcast. Follow us on Twitter.
Problems, brother.
Hey, look. Follow us on Twitter at MyBCSN1.
The number one.
Oh, number one, Twitter and Instagram. Find us personally on Twitter at DRB365 and at BCSN Drew, DREW. That's where you can find me, Brian, and him, AD. On the web, our webpage, www.mybcsn.net. And we're going through the top games of 2019. And I feel like I should have took a break probably somewhere back in the midpoint of the year. But anyway, we've gone through 9 weeks of just spotlighting some of the games, try not to talk too much in depth about them, but just to list them out there and remind you what was out there. And so far from games of the week, we talked about week number 3, week number 4, and week number 9 as some of the weeks that had some really big games, exciting games, significant games. So, we'll kind of put that out there and give everyone a chance. So far, if you had to, how would you rank these 3 weeks so far, AD?
Of the 3 weeks that we have on our list right now, I got to go with 9 as my number one, because as you get deeper into the season, the games get more meaningful, and you start to get into the rivalries within the conference. So I would say 9-4-3.
Okay. Well, we got one more upcoming, but first let me tell you about week number 10 here. Which started with a Friday night game, a contest that we actually broadcast on the Black College Sports Network. And week number 10 started with Tuskegee traveling to Jacksonville to take on Edward Waters College. Of course, EWC provisional members of the SIC. They've had a pretty good SIC schedule this year. And Tuskegee was one of those games.
Except for the fact that they had to play everybody on the road, it seemed like. Well,
no, I mean, you got to think, this year think about who they had at home. They had Tuskegee at home. They had Morehouse at home. They had Miles at home. I mean, that's a pretty good schedule.
But think about who they had on the road. They had Lane on the road. They had Kentucky State on the road. They had Central State on the road.
Well, in terms of
that's
distance,
a lot of miles.
Yeah, in terms of distance, it was no fun. I'm sure. Definitely a lot of.
And then they had the nerve to play. Was it Southern? And
they went to Southern and Prairie View
and A&M. So they whoever had their bus contract this year made a lot of money off of Ever Waters based on the mileage.
Stop. All right. So that game, we've got that game on the list. Actually, turned out to be a pretty good game in the second half. Edward Waters with a second half comeback. Probably could have won the game as they scored a late touchdown to make it 27-26. But a young man scoring a touchdown, committed a penalty, took his helmet off, and what went from a 2-yard, 2-point attempt turned into a 15, 17-yard, actually a 20-something yard field goal attempt that was actually missed. So,
and let's back that up, Brian. There was the 15-yard celebration penalty, placed the ball on the 17, and the kick was missed. But there was a 5-yard penalty on on Tuskegee for jumping off sides, which wound up putting the ball back at the 12, and the PAT was missed again.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, thank you. Good point. So that's how the week started. Good win for Tuskegee, bad loss for EWC. Then you had the third big showdown in the MEAC between the top 4 teams. This time you had North Carolina A&T traveling to South Carolina State. So you got to think back. This was a game that, many thought would decide the championship because at this point, both of these two teams have lost to FAMU. So, the winner of this game was in the driver's seat to basically get the bid to the Celebration Bowl. I mean, barring anything crazy happening the next week or two. Hint, hint. So all that would happen is South Carolina State had a lead. They got off to a good first quarter start. But then somewhere about middle of the second quarter, just a series of bad mistakes and some great offense by A&T, and they end up pulling out a 22-20, I believe it was 20, victory over South Carolina State. And it would turn out to be the big reason why South Carolina State, or that A&T, ended up going to the Celebration Bowl and not South Carolina State, just by nature of the result of this game, as both teams will later go on to be crowned or called co-champions. Now, over in the SWAC, the only big game from that week, Southern and Alabama A&M. Southern at home hosting Alabama A&M, and this one was significant, a East versus West matchup. Alabama A&M needed a win, and they thought they had it, but Ladarius Skelton got a late touchdown to grab the lead in this ball game, and A&M would actually turn around and drive the ball right back down the field against Southern's defense, and they got within, I believe, about 25 yards of the red zone even before a couple of big defensive plays stopped the drive and prevented Akil Glass from making another big comeback win. So Southern comes out with a 35-31 win. Southern needed that win. Turned out to be a big win for Southern's season at that point. All right, now we move forward. Week number 11.
We call this
week
Upset
number 11.
Saturday, Brian.
Oh man, this was a week. Upset Saturday is what we can call this week, and we'll start in the Northeast. We'll start with a pair of MEAC games. At this point in the season, North Carolina A&T is in the driver's seat of the MEAC. Bethune-Cookman even though they lost to South Carolina State, at this point in the season, they still haven't played A&T, and they still haven't played FAMU. So the two teams were scheduled to meet in week number 12. So all that was in the way of that being a big showdown. And really the last big hurdle for A&T was A&T getting by Morgan State, traveling up to Baltimore, and Bethune-Cookman getting past Delaware State, traveling up to Delaware. Well, for the second consecutive year, Morgan State beat North Carolina A&T, and actually I don't think Morgan ever trailed in this game, as they beat North Carolina A&T 22-16. At the time, Morgan was ranked as one of the lower ranked teams in FCS. At the end of the year, Morgan was ranked 109 of 126 teams, 367th in college football by versus rankings, versus sports simulation rankings. And so it actually would be it'd be the loss that really, I think, made the difference in A&T holding a stronger claim than the one that they already stand on about the Black College National Championship. If they win this game and go on with the rest of their schedule, you know, they would have finished with 10 wins after the Celebration Bowl. But losing to Morgan State on the road, an ugly resume loss. And then you had Bethune-Cookman losing to Delaware State 19-13, a game in which Delaware State never trailed, had the lead for the entire ball game. So pretty significant wins right there in the MEAC. A couple of games in the SWAC that were significant. The first one, you had Grambling, who at the time was coming in this on a 5 or 6 game winning streak. You know, Grambling started the year 0-4, but they were winners of 5 in a row. I mean, Grambling had turned their season around, playing some good ball heading into this contest against Alcorn State. Of course, Alcorn State, needing this win to pretty much cement their season. And it came down to an overtime field goal attempt that was actually blocked. Grambling makes a field goal in overtime and then blocks Alcorn State's field goal attempt, and they won. Grambling wins 19-16 to win that ball game. That was in overtime, by the way. I mean, that was a pretty big contest, and really just opened up everything in the East Division there at that moment in time. Also in the SWAC, you had Alabama A&M taking on Jackson State, and Alabama A&M would score 3 touchdowns in the last 5 minutes to win this game over Jackson State. I mean, unbelievable. So, I mean, you talk about things shaping up for Alabama A&M in the East. Not only did they get a loss from Alcorn State, but then they find a way to come back and take a win from Jackson State. And that was a tough loss for Jackson State, obviously, who also was on a bit of a winning streak coming into that game. So 2 pretty significant games there. But just think of that, AD. 3 touchdowns in the last 5 minutes. That might be the best comeback of the year.
I would tend to agree with you on that, Brian. It was real interesting that particular week and then that particular game during that week, Brian.
Moving over into, we had the final week of the CIAA and the SIC prior to championships, and 3 of the divisions had not been decided. The only division coming into this week that had been decided was Bowie State winning the Northern Division of the CIAA. But the CIAA South hasn't been decided yet, and the SIAC West had not been decided yet. So I'll start with the SIAC, where you had Miles traveling to Tuskegee. And in a sort of a similar bizarro world flip of what happened the year before, where Tuskegee went to Central State and lost, opened the door for Miles to win the title. it was Miles going up to Central State and losing, which opened the door for Tuskegee to have an opportunity to win the SIAC East or West, excuse me. Unfortunately, though, AD, Tuskegee did not take advantage of that, as Miles would come out with a 20-6 win, and then actually was even Tuskegee's homecoming. So they beat them for the second year in a row. This time they beat him at homecoming, and Miles would go on to win the SIAC West. You over that one, though, right?
Moving on, Brian. Moving on.
I love you. And also a big game that happened, Morehouse 40-39 victory over Clark. I put that on the list. I can't recall what the significance of that game was. Can you, AD? I think there was some stats that were pretty significant.
Which game was that one?
Morehouse 40, Clark 39, other than the Battle of Atlanta.
The Battle of Atlanta went down to, it was a 1-point ball game. I believe that's what we put that out. And it submitted a 0-10 season for Clark Atlanta.
Okay. All right. Now, moving over to the CIAA. Both divisions, there was obviously we said the North was decided, but in the Northern Division, you had the Virginia rivalry between State and Union that would possibly decide a playoff berth for somebody. I believe at the time, Virginia State was the higher-ranked team in the region, at least compared to Virginia Union. What was it? State weren't they ranked like 6th in the Division II rankings coming into this game?
I'm sorry, I missed you there, Brian.
I was saying Virginia State was the higher-ranked team coming into this matchup in terms of the regional rankings.
Yeah, Virginia State came in at number 7, I do believe. Either 6 or 7, and Union was number 9, I do believe, coming into that particular game.
All right, yeah. So this one in true fashion, I mean, somebody had a chance at an at-large bid. Basically, the winner of this game had an opportunity for an at-large bid into the playoffs. It would go down to overtime, as Virginia Union basically had to they rallied in the second half, ended up taking the lead on Virginia State. Virginia State would get a late touchdown in the fourth quarter to tie the ball game, and then would actually have an opportunity to win in regulation, but miss the field goal. So it goes to overtime. Virginia State kicks the field goal first to take a 27-24 lead over Union. And then Union is forced into a field goal attempt, or at least we thought they were, as probably one of the most improbable, still probably one of the most unbeknownst losses of the season that we saw. Virginia Union, with the nation's Division II nation's best kicker on their team, who was our number 5 player of the year in special teams. Virginia Union went with a fake field goal attempt, sort of a little delay misdirection, where all we can describe it as Tobias Harris looked like he came into the huddle. What's it called?
The water bucket play. It's the water bucket play.
Okay. For those who don't know what the water bucket play is, they send a player towards the sideline and gives the impression that he's about to walk off the field when in fact he stands near the sideline facing the bench, and then as the play is snapped, he runs down the sideline. Well, the pass attempt was way too far and over the head of anyone that was in the area. And the execution was horrible. And the decision was questionable, and Virginia State ends up winning 27-24 in overtime.
And the play was executed so poorly, it took running the video back multiple times to actually see what was supposed to happen.
Right. And so that's how that game ended. And then over in the CIAA South, you had it was still up in the air as to who would go to the championship. If Fayetteville State beat Winston-Salem State, they would advance. Of course, last year Winston-Salem beat Fayetteville State pretty bad, and Winston-Salem had actually had a dominating history in the decade against Fayetteville State. So, I mean, this was not going to be an easy win for Fayetteville State. But if Fayetteville State lost, Shaw would advance to the title game with a win. So if Shaw wins and Fayetteville State loses, Shaw represents the CIAA South. If Fayetteville State wins, they go. And so from what we learned in this ballgame, Shaw would actually play first by about an hour. Shaw would end up beating St. Aug 24-21, although they, I believe there was a bit of a comeback that Shaw had to make late in that game to win that game. And then Fayetteville beated Winston-Salem 31-17, and they had to overcome a bit of a deficit in the first half, I believe, as Winston-Salem looked like, I think they jumped out to a lead and looked like you might have a repeat of what happened the year before. But anyway, Fayetteville State won. Shaw won as well, but because Fayetteville won, they ended up clinching the CIAA South. So that was a pretty exciting week number 11.
And then there was also a couple of other things, Brian, that happened in that particular week. The Virginia State win, which they thought they were going to have an opportunity to go to the playoffs. You couple that with a West Florida loss, and I believe there was a Delta State loss where Virginia State thought they was solidified into the playoffs. But Virginia State did not jump West Florida despite the loss because of the strength of schedule and the conference ratings. So Virginia State wound up remaining at the number 7 at that number 7 spot, which was crucial because it opened the door for Miles a week later to knock Virginia State out of the playoffs. And Virginia State was probably at that point in time probably the second best team in black college football at that point in time as far as on the Division II level. Also, Brian, let it be noted, Virginia Union only had 3 losses on the season, finished 7-3. All 3 of those losses were to teams that finished in the top 10 of their region.
Wow. That's
Lenore Rhine, Bowie, and Virginia State.
Wow, tough losses, tough schedule, tough region for Virginia Union. And so, so keep that one in mind, week number 11. So that one was a good week, just in its totality there. So moving on down, week number 12 was actually the championship week. Bowie State defeated Fayetteville State by a score of 23-7 for their second consecutive CIAA championship. It was also Miles defeating Albany State 21-6 for Miles' second consecutive SIAC championship. Both teams would advance to the playoffs with those wins. Actually, so Miles with that win ended up earning a ranking that we don't know whether they ended up as 8, but they pretty much knocked Virginia State out of the playoffs. It's pretty much presumed that they knocked Virginia State out of the playoffs.
Miles, as a conference champion, had to finish within the top 9 of the regional rankings to get what they call a preferred qualifier status. At-large teams must finish within the top 7 of the rankings. If a preferred qualifier finishes at 9, they will knock out the lowest at-large team. In this case, we believe that lowest at-large team was Virginia State, because that was the only movement between the 2 weeks in the regional rankings. Was Virginia State was out and Miles was in.
Right. All right. And hey, by the way, you did a great job again. Got to give your props on your coverage down the stretch on that. So props to you.
And one other note, Albany State, Miles was unranked going into that last game, and Albany State was ranked. They were ranked I believe they were 9 or 10 going into that SIAC champ. No, they were ranked number 9, with Fayetteville State being number 10. So for the Virginia State folks, the chances of them being knocked out of the playoffs were great because they were sitting in that number 7 seed, because any of those 3 teams would have probably knocked Virginia State out. A Fayetteville upset over Miles would have definitely boosted them from 10 into that top 9 status as a conference champion. Would have cost Bowie a home game, and Albany State was already sitting at number 9, so that victory was not going to hurt them if they would have defeated Miles. So Virginia State was in a bad spot going into that game.
All right, well said. The only other game of significance in week number 12 was Alcorn State's 34-28 win over Alabama A&M, which clinched their 6th consecutive SWAC East Division title. They still had to win one more game to guarantee their home field or guarantee home field for the SWAC championship game, but still all impressive, all the same, 6 consecutive wins. 6 consecutive SWAC East Division titles for Alcorn State. Moving to week number 13, and going back to Division II, you had a pair of playoff losses. I think of the 2, Bowie State losing at home to Carson Newman 17-9 was the more shocking of the 2. Bowie was the higher-ranked team, the 3 seed in the playoffs. And of course, coming into that game unbeaten, and but Carson Newman, we talked about that game a little earlier. Carson Newman played a better game in a couple of plays and executed better at the end of the ball game. Bowie State did have chances; they just couldn't get in the end zone. Miles was pretty much handled by Lenore Ryan, 36-7. So that's how that game ended. And then over in the SWAC, we had the Soul Bowl. And Alcorn State dominated that game over Jackson State, 41-7, clinching home field for the 2nd consecutive year for the SWAC championship game. Over in the MEAC, a pair of games that would determine people's perception as well as the conference championship. You had North Carolina A&T blowing out North Carolina Central. I believe the final score was like 57-0. I don't think Central had given up 50 points in that series, if ever. I don't think that. I think that was the largest margin of defeat in the history of that Aggie Eagle Classic. Thought that one might be a little bit closer, but it was not. South Carolina State, though, would get a 20-17 win, actually come back in the second half to win and defeat Norfolk State. I think that game went overtime, possibly. And South Carolina State would actually
watch out for Norfolk next year.
Yeah, hey, it'll be interesting. They're on the right track, especially offensively. South Carolina State would gain a quote-unquote split of the MEAC championship with that win, obviously taking into consideration that they lost to North Carolina A&T. It would be A&T that would go to the Celebration Bowl. And then, of course, there was the Florida Classic. Bethune-Cookman, having won 8 in a row coming into the ball game against FAMU, would actually get number 9, and they would end FAMU's 9-game winning streak as a late interception was the drive staller, and FAMU, or Bethune-Cookman rather, would win 31-27. And all that loss did was just really open the door for North Carolina A&T and Alcorn State to have a shot at a claim of the Black College National Championship debate. But, we're aware of how that all played out in the end. So, and then, of course, week number 14 was the Bayou Classic. Southern, the winner of this game goes to the SWAC championship game. Southern would get a late block. We talked about, how about blocks, right? Grambling blocked Alcorn at Alcorn, which sort of helped Grambling have a shot at even being in this Bayou Classic or being in the SWAC championship game. But it would be their field goal, which got blocked by Southern in the fourth quarter as time was expiring, or maybe like a second or two left. And Southern would win 30-28 over Grambling, as Grambling had 2 field goal attempts that would actually go against them in that second half. So it was pretty miserable day from the field goal unit perspective for Grambling. And props to Southern for winning that Bayou Classic. And then, of course, week 15 was the SWAC championship game that Alcorn State won over Southern. And so, AD, that kind of wraps it up. And for the top weeks, I think we all have come to the conclusion that the top weeks of the year were week 3, week 4, week 9, and week 11. So that's how all that ended up. Anything else in there that I missed?
I think we pretty much got it all. My vote is for week 11, though, because of the significance of that particular week.
You go week 11.
Yes.
Yeah, I think let me take a quick peek at 9. It's so tough between 9 and 11. I think 11 did have more surprising outcomes and just the way it all played out. I think in terms of storylines to talk about, that definitely was a big week. Yeah, you're right. If I had to, it's tough. You hate to forget about week 4, but that's how recency. I mean, week 4 you had 4 games that went down to the wire in week 4. So think about that. You had 4 games that went down to the wire in week 4. Week 11 you had 1, 2, 3, 4 upsets. Or really you had 2 big upsets, a major comeback, and 2 games where field goals in overtime cost teams games. So that's what you had from week 11. So yeah, you're probably. I think I tend to agree with you on that one. I think 11. I'd probably go 11-4, then 9 and 3 if I had to rank them in order. But maybe what we'll do is we'll put a supplemental poll out with this segment of the podcast and see what people think. All right. Well, that's going to do this segment. When you know what, we're gonna take a breather, and when the next time you hear us, we will be into part number 3 of our end of our season podcast, and at that point, we're going to be talking about the top performances of the year. And then we'll also get into the interesting debate and look back on the past decade of black college football teams. So that'll be podcast number 3. But this one we did in a couple different segments. Always interesting to recap and think back on the past year. Thank you for listening in on this one. And I hope you will share it with a couple people, share your thoughts and opinions. And we're going to put together a good part 3. You're down for one more part to this thing, right, AD?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. While while we transition into our basketball season.
All right. So we got so make sure you check us out. We'll make sure to keep you posted when we drop segment number 3 of our end of the year podcast. And thank you for listening to this one. Again, follow us on Twitter at MyBCSN1, the number 1. Follow AD Drew at BCSN Drew, DREW. Find me at DRB365. And of course, make sure to find our website, www.mybcsn.net. And of course, we're on Facebook, Black College Sports Network, as well as the BCSN SportsWrap. That's going to do it for this show, for this part, to be said. For AD Drew, I'm Brian Fulford. Thanks for listening to part 2 of our end of the year podcast. Part 3 coming up soon. We are out.
It's like a loot machine. Going around town, trying to get down. It's like a loot machine.
But you stay hard.